I still remember the sound, not the pain at first, that came a second later, but the sound, a short, ugly thud, like someone had slammed a heavy book shut. Except the book was my face, and the one who slammed it was my dad. You know, when your brain can't process something fast enough, when you're caught between shock and disbelief, that's where I was. 1 second, I was standing in the middle of our living room, trying to explain myself. The next, my head snapped sideways. My jaw lit up with fire, and I could taste blood. And then, I heard it, the laughter, not just from my mum, though hers was sharp, mean. The kind of laugh people use when they want you to feel small. But from my brother too. He was sitting on the couch, holding a slice of pizza, grinning like he'd just watched the funniest YouTube video ever. I wasn't sure which hurt more, the punch, or knowing the two people who should have been horrified were enjoying it. You're probably wondering, why? Why would my dad, who's supposed to protect me, lash out like that? Why would my own family treat it like a joke? To explain that, I have to take you back to the start of that night. It was supposed to be a quiet Friday. Dad had gotten home late from work, looking tense. Mum was already in one of her moods, slamming cabinets in the kitchen, muttering under her breath. My brother Ryan was in the living room playing his video games, oblivious to the tension building like static in the air. I had just come back from meeting my friend Jake. Jake's been my best friend since middle school. The one person who's always had my back. We'd been working on a project for his photography class. He wanted me to pose for some shots downtown. Nothing major, when I walked through the front door. I could feel it immediately. You ever step into a room and sense that everyone's already been talking about you? Yeah, that. Mum gave me this fake sweet smile and said, "Well, look who decided to show up." At first, I thought she was just annoyed I was late for dinner. But then Dad walked in from the hallway, and his expression, it wasn't just annoyance, it was accusation. "Where were you?" he asked, voice low. I told him. I was with Jake. We were working on his project. That's when Mum's smile twisted into something cruel. "Oh, you mean your boyfriend?" she said, loud enough for Ryan to hear. Ryan immediately snorted with laughter. I froze. For context, I'm not gay. Not that it would matter if I was, but my parents have this nasty habit of mocking anything that doesn't fit into their little picture of normal. And Jake's a bit more stylish, softer spoken, which in my family's toxic world means he's a target. I tried to brush it off, but Dad wasn't letting it go. He started in with questions that weren't really questions. Why do you spend so much time with him? What do you even do together? And then the classic, "You're not hiding anything from us, are you?" My chest was tight, but I kept my voice calm. "No, Dad, we're just friends. I told you, we were working on." That's when he stepped forward. His face was so close I could smell the mix of aftershave and beer on his breath. "You don't talk to me like that," he said, and before I could even process what was happening, that thud, the next few seconds were a blur. My cheek stung. My vision wobbled. I touched my face and saw a smear of blood on my fingertips. Mum's laugh cut through the ringing. In my ears, "Drama queen," she muttered, shaking her head. Ryan chuckled. Again, looking at me like I was some pathetic joke. And that was it, something in me snapped, not the kind of snap where you scream or fight back. No. The quieter kind. The one where you stop caring what these people think of you, where the fear gets replaced with something colder. I went upstairs without saying a word, closed my bedroom door, sat on my bed, staring at the floor, and I made 3 calls. The first one was to Jake. The second, to someone I hadn't spoken to in months. The third, well, that one changed everything. The first call was easy. Jake picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you alright?" he asked immediately. I guess he could hear it in my voice, the kind of silence that isn't normal. I told him what happened. Not all the details. I didn't need to. He's seen enough of my family's behavior over the years to fill in the blanks. There was this pause. Then Jake said, "Do you want me to come get you?" And that's when it hit me. I did, but I didn't want to just run away. Not yet. There were things I needed to set in motion first. The second call, that was harder. It was to Aunt Melissa. We're not close. Not anymore. When I was younger, she used to be the fun aunt who'd sneak me extra dessert, who'd listen when no one else in the family did. But after some big fight between her and my parents, one I was never allowed to know the details of, she just stopped coming around. I still had her number, though, and I knew one thing about her: she hated my dad, not in a petty way. In a "you've done too much damage to too many people" way. She picked up after a few rings, her voice wary. "Hello, Aunt Melissa, it's me, Nathan." There was a beat of silence, and then, "Nathan, is everything okay?" No one had asked me that question in my house for years. I almost broke down right there. I told her enough to make her go quiet, really quiet. Then she said, "All right, stay calm, don't say anything to them. I'll handle this." I didn't know what she meant by handle this, but there was a steadiness in her voice that made me feel not safe exactly, but not alone either. The third call, that one, wasn't to a friend or family. It was to someone who would make sure things didn't just get brushed under the rug this time. I dialed the number with shaking hands. The woman on the other end said, "Emergency services." "What's your emergency?" My voice was surprisingly steady when I said, "I need to report an assault. My father hit me. My mother witnessed it. So did my brother." There was a pause on the other end. A professional pause, but I could hear the shift in her tone when she spoke again. "Are you safe right now?" "Yes," I lied. "Physically, maybe. Emotionally, not even close." She took my information, asked me to stay on the line while she dispatched officers to my address. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen when they arrived, whether they'd believe me, whether my parents would twist the story, but I knew one thing for sure: tonight wasn't going to end with me quietly pretending nothing had happened. Downstairs, I could hear my dad's voice booming, telling Ryan some story about putting me in my place. Mum laughed in response, like this was just another funny family memory in the making. I glanced at my bedroom door. Any second now, there'd be a knock, maybe a confrontation. Instead, there was a knock from outside. Firm, repeated, the kind of knock you don't ignore. From my window, I could see the blue and red flashes washing over our front yard. 2 officers stood at the door. Mum answered, looking confused at first, and then her face hardened. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but I caught my dad's voice, loud, defensive. Then one of the officers stepped inside, and the look on my dad's face shifted from defiance to something else. That's when I realized the night was just getting started. The officer's shoes clicked on the hardwood as they entered. Dad straightened instantly. Like posture could armor him against consequences. Mum and Ryan looked small, not scared exactly, but unsettled. And me. I stayed in my room, just behind the door, watching. The taller officer, a woman with her hair pulled into a tight bun, spoke first. "Mr. Henderson." "Ma'am, we received a report of an assault here tonight." Dad scoffed, that same arrogant, dismissive laugh he always used. "This is ridiculous," he said. "My son is exaggerating. There's no assault." Mum's lips pressed together. Ryan avoided my eyes, fiddling with the hem of his shirt. I stepped out, not yelling, not crying, just stepped out. "I'm right here," I said. My voice steady, cool, controlled. The room went quiet. The officer nodded to me. "Can you tell me what happened?" I didn't embellish. I didn't soften it. I told her exactly what happened. How Dad had punched me in the chest while I was trying to leave the dinner table. How Mum and Ryan laughed instead of helping. I described every insult, every threat, every humiliation. When I finished, the officer glanced at my parents, then at me, then back at them. "Sir," she said slowly, "we need a statement from you as well." Dad opened his mouth, ready to protest. And I swear for a second, I saw something like fear flicker across his face. It didn't last. He clenched his jaw and tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Meanwhile, Mum's hands were trembling. She wasn't used to being in the hot seat like this. And Ryan, he looked like he wanted to crawl under the nearest table. The officer asked me for the time, the place, witnesses, the whole report. I handed over the details, keeping my answers concise, factual, unemotional. No tears, no shouting. Just words. She listened, nodded, and then said something I didn't expect. We'll need to place a temporary restraining order on Mr. Henderson until this is investigated, and we may need to take him into custody tonight if we determine there's ongoing risk. Dad's face went white. Mum gasped. Ryan's jaw dropped. I realized something in that moment. Power isn't about muscle. It's not about who laughs the loudest, or who controls the house. Power is control over consequences. I watched Dad's smug confidence crack, just a little, as the officers began taking notes, photographing bruises, and documenting the scene. And, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. By the time the officers finished their initial investigation, they'd taken statements from neighbors who'd heard the commotion, yelling, furniture being slammed, and, yes, the sound of my dad striking me. One neighbor even mentioned hearing Mum laughing in the background. The officer gave me a small nod, a reassurance that what I'd feared would be dismissed wasn't. I wasn't invisible. Dad was quiet in the car when they left. Mum barely spoke. Ryan stared out the window like the world outside was more interesting than the one he'd lived in for years. Later that night, I sat alone in my room. I thought about the 3 calls I'd made. The first brought Jake, someone I trusted. Someone who reminded me that not all loyalty in life is earned by fear. The second brought Aunt Melissa, someone who remembered the real me, who saw through the masks my family wore. The third brought the law. Someone who enforced the truth when no one else would. And I realized something chilling. My family's laughter that night wasn't just cruelty. It was the sound of people who thought they were untouchable. But untouchable ends where accountability begins by midnight. My phone buzzed. It was Jake. Did it work? He asked, voice calm but urgent. Yes, I said. Yes, it did, but this is just the start. Melissa texted shortly after. You did the right thing, don't look back. They'll crumble in time. I didn't need to respond. I knew she was right. And in that silence, I felt the first real taste of freedom. Outside the house was quiet. The streetlights cast long shadows across the lawn. But inside, in my chest, something had shifted. A fire had been lit. Not of revenge, not of anger, but of clarity. For the first time, I knew I could survive this family. I could dismantle the lies, the manipulation, the cruelty. And I could emerge stronger, unbroken, untouchable in ways they would never understand. Because this time, it wasn't just words or wishes or silent tears. This time, I had action. And action changes everything. The morning sunlight cut through my blinds like a spotlight. I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone in hand, reviewing messages from last night. Jake's texts were calm, almost clinical, but beneath that, I could sense his pride. Melissa's encouragement was steady. A quiet anchor. Then came a knock. I froze. Not with fear, I knew who it was. It had to be Ryan. He never knocked. Otherwise, I opened the door. His face was pale. His eyes weren't full of amusement this time. There was no laughter, no mockery, just a quiet unease. I don't know what to say, he stammered. You don't have to, I said. Just don't lie anymore. Not to me, not to anyone. He nodded, swallowed, and left. And just like that, he became my first quiet ally, though he didn't know it yet. By late morning, the reality began to sink in for my parents. Dad received a call from his lawyer. The voice on the other end wasn't reassuring, it was clipped, professional, and had a weight to it that made Dad's usual arrogance crack just slightly. Mum paced the living room, phone in hand, eyes darting between her husband and the walls, like the room itself might offer her escape. Her laughter from last night had vanished. Now, it was replaced by a fear she'd never felt before. The kind that comes from realizing the world outside your house doesn't bend to your will. I, meanwhile, stayed out of sight, not because I feared confrontation, but because I wanted to watch the first flickers of consequence reach them. I wanted to see the moment they realized that laughter at someone else's pain doesn't last forever. Around noon, there was another knock at my door. This time, it was a representative from the court, a social worker. She didn't speak in judgment, didn't carry authority in her voice, but there was a firmness that made it clear she was there to protect, not negotiate. "I need to talk to you about temporary custody and protective measures," she said. I nodded. I explained the ongoing threats, the physical assault, the mocking and belittling everything. She took meticulous notes, asked precise questions, and promised that the right steps would be taken to ensure I was safe by mid-afternoon. The house had fallen into chaos. Dad was on the phone, probably, trying to salvage what remained of his reputation. Mum's hand trembled as she typed emails, no doubt trying to cover tracks, adjust narratives, rewrite memories, and Ryan. Well, Ryan spent most of the day in his room, headphones on, trying to drown out reality. But me, I spent the day contacting everyone I could trust. Lawyers, friends, mentors. I made calls I'd delayed for years. Calls I'd been too scared to make, and each one reminded me that strength isn't just about surviving, it's about taking decisive action. Even when the world you know is collapsing around you by evening. The media had caught wind of the story. No sensational headlines yet, just murmurs, whispers, online chatter. But I knew the storm was approaching, and I welcomed it. For the first time, I wasn't hiding, I wasn't shrinking, I wasn't silenced. That night, I sat by the window, looking out at the street, empty, quiet. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm breaks completely. I reflected on the night that changed everything, the punch, the laughter, the betrayal. But also, the calls, the phone in my hand, that connected me to the people who mattered. The knowledge that action, not words, shapes your life. And in that quiet, I made a promise to myself. No matter what came next, no matter how they tried to manipulate or intimidate, I would stay resolute. I would stay strategic. I would stay unbroken because now I understood something critical. Pain is temporary, consequences are eternal. As I drifted to sleep, my phone buzzed. A new message from Melissa. Prepare yourself, they'll be coming at you harder tomorrow. And they won't play fair. I smiled. A small, cold smile. Let them come, I was ready. Morning came faster than I expected. I woke to the shrill ring of my phone at 6:17 a.m. Not a text, not a call from a friend, it was an unknown number. I answered cautiously. A deep, controlled voice came through. Julian Blackwood. Yes, I replied. My voice steady despite the adrenaline that had already begun coursing through me. We're from the local district attorney's office. We need your full statement on the incidents last night, the assault, the threats, everything. Can you come down immediately? I swallowed. I'll be there. After hanging up, I moved swiftly. I packed a small bag with essentials, my laptop, the flash drive containing evidence I'd secured, and a notebook filled with dates, names, and incidents. No emotion. Just focus. Today wasn't about revenge. Today was about accountability. Arriving at the DA's office, I was immediately struck by the contrast between the sterile, organized halls and the chaos of my own family life. Everything was structured, methodical, procedural. The air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Nothing like the tension, the fear, the laughter of abuse that had filled my home. Detective Harris met me at the front desk. Tall, imposing yet kind. His eyes scanned me once. Before he spoke, "Mr. Blackwood, we'll take it from here. Be honest, be thorough, and don't hold back." I nodded, sitting across from him at the table. As I recounted everything, the punch, the laughter, the ridicule, I felt a strange calm. This was not just a retelling, this was a declaration. Every word was documented, every detail scrutinized. Hours passed. Witness statements were gathered, phone records, messages, videos, all meticulously catalogued. It wasn't just my word anymore, there was evidence, proof, a trail that could not be erased. Back at home, the first wave of panic hit my parents. Mum's voice trembled as she called. Her lawyer, Dad's usual arrogance, had been replaced by frantic pacing and muttered threats. "You'll never get away with this," he hissed to no one in particular, his voice cracking under the weight of his own fear. I remained silent, observing. From a distance, I didn't need to say anything. The panic, the fear, it spoke louder than any words could. By mid-afternoon, the situation escalated. Ryan appeared at my door again. He looked different, uncertain, yes, but also relieved. I know what you did last night. The calls, he said quietly. I think you saved all of us." "You mean yourself," I corrected softly. He flinched, but I continued. "You can help if you want, but don't let them drag you down, not again." He nodded, a silent agreement forming between us. For the first time, I saw a flicker of the brother I had always wanted him to be, someone capable of choosing right over convenience. Integrity over fear. Evening brought a storm. Not just in the sky, though the rain lashed against my windows, but in the form of messages, calls, and uninvited visits. Dad tried intimidation, Mum tried manipulation. Even Logan sent cryptic warnings, but none of it worked. By now, I had established lines of communication with law enforcement, social workers, and legal counsel. I knew my rights. I knew the law. I knew that no matter how loud they shouted, how hard they tried, I had built a foundation of truth that could not be shaken. That night, I reviewed everything I had gathered over the past 48 hours. Messages, recordings, witness statements, financial documents. Everything lined up perfectly. Every lie, every manipulation, every cruel act, all accounted for, all undeniable. Melissa texted me, "Tomorrow, it gets real. Are you ready?" I replied simply, "I've never been more ready," and I was for the first time in years. The fear that had ruled my life was gone. In its place was clarity, focus, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice, not revenge, would prevail. But as the rain poured outside, I knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The calls, the evidence, the statements, they were just the first strike. What would come next would test every ounce of courage, strategy, and resilience I had left, and I was ready to face it head-on. The morning sun struggled through thick clouds as I stepped out of my apartment. The streets were slick with rain, reflecting neon signs and headlights like shattered mirrors. I could feel it in my chest, the weight of anticipation, the electricity of inevitability. Today, the first major confrontation would happen. Detective Harris had called at 7:03 a.m., instructing me to arrive at the DA's office with all my evidence intact. Not a single copy missing. Not a single loose end. By now, I understood. Law enforcement didn't operate on guesswork. They operated on proof, and I had proof. More than enough to expose the twisted dynamics of my family. Arriving at the office, I was greeted by a team of investigators. A group of 5, all mid-30s to early 40s. A mix of men and women, each with a notebook or laptop in hand. They moved with the precision of a military unit. Each action deliberate, each question calculated. "Mr. Blackwood," Harris said, his tone almost warm. "You did the right thing by coming forward. Today, we make sure the law sees the truth." I nodded, taking a deep breath. We spent the next hour reviewing recordings, messages, and documents. Everything was cross-referenced, timestamps verified, metadata scrutinized. By the time the meeting ended, the path forward was clear. We would confront my family with undeniable evidence in a formal legal setting. Back at home, the tension was palpable. Mum paced like a caged animal. Dad's jaw was set so tight, I thought it might snap. Logan hovered by the staircase, hands buried in his pockets, eyes darting nervously. I entered calmly, almost detached. No fear, no hesitation, just a quiet, controlled presence that seemed to absorb the chaos around me. "Julian," Dad spat the name like venom. "You think you can destroy us? You have no idea what you're doing." "I have more than an idea," I replied evenly, pulling my laptop from my bag and placing it on the dining table. All of this conversations, Transfers, threats, everything is documented. I opened the flash drive, projecting files onto the large screen in our living room. The reactions were immediate and visceral. Mum gasped. Logan staggered back. Dad's face turned red. Not with anger, but with the first trace of panic I had ever seen on him. I let them stew for a moment. The silence was deafening. Then, I began, voice calm, methodical. Let's start with last night. You all laughed when he hit me. I gestured toward Dad. You smiled when he saw me in pain. I said, looking at Mum and Logan. You justified cruelty because it suited you. That stops now, and here's why. One by one, I presented files. Screenshots, recordings, and witness statements. Each piece more damning than the last. Dad's forged documents, Logan's complicity, Mum's silent approval, all laid bare. They tried to interrupt, tried to argue, tried to manipulate. But the law doesn't negotiate with fear, and I didn't back down. Every attempt to twist the narrative was met with cold, factual evidence. Hours passed. By late afternoon, I had walked them through years of deception. The room felt like a courtroom in itself. The walls closing in on their lies, and then, the final blow, a recording from my brother Ryan, captured. Without their knowledge, his voice calm but firm. I know what you did. I'm done participating in this. I won't lie for you anymore. Mum's face paled. Logan's fists trembled. Dad sank into a chair, speechless. For the first time, they were confronted not just with facts, but with the reality that their control had crumbled. Evening descended, the sky darkening as the first police officers arrived for formal questioning. They took statements, verified documentation, and explained the legal ramifications of the evidence. It was clear, arrests were imminent. This wasn't a threat. It was the inevitable outcome of years of abuse and corruption. I watched from a distance as they were escorted into separate vehicles. No shouting, no pleading, no bravado, just silence. The kind that comes when a person finally realizes that the world has been irrevocably dismantled. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a quiet exhaustion and a sense of profound relief. For the first time in years, I was in control of my own story. No one could manipulate, intimidate, or harm me again. My phone buzzed. It was Melissa. Are you okay? I smiled faintly, replying, better than ever. We're just getting started, and I knew she was right. This was only the beginning. There were more battles ahead, more confrontations, more truths to uncover. But for the first time, I had the clarity, the evidence, and the strength to face whatever came next. The dawn crept in like a cautious observer, grey and hesitant, through the blinds of my apartment. I hadn't slept. Not fully. My mind raced over every conversation, every recording, every file I had turned over to the authorities. Even in moments of exhaustion, one truth settled in me like a stone in water. I had already crossed a line from which there was no turning back. There was no retreat. No reconciliation with the people who had betrayed me, laughed at me, and hit me. Only the path forward, legal, decisive. And final. The phone rang sharply at 6:42 a.m., dragging me fully into consciousness. It was Detective Harris. Again, Julian. We're moving forward today with subpoenas and interrogations. Your parents and Logan have been cooperative. Well, as much as they can be, but expect resistance, and expect drama. I nodded silently, though he couldn't see me. Drama was a given. For years, my family had built an empire of intimidation, manipulation, and violence. Now the mask was slipping, and every lie they had told was unraveling like frayed rope. I arrived at the federal courthouse in Newark mid-morning. The sky had cleared, leaving pale sun against the stark, steel-blue horizon. Inside, marble and glass reflected the cold efficiency of justice, impartial, unforgiving, unwavering. Lawyers, clerks, and agents moved in a choreography I had begun to recognize over the past weeks. This was the stage on which truth would finally dominate. Detective Harris greeted me, nodding grimly. Julian, Today, you're not just a witness. You're the architect of accountability. The evidence you've provided is rock solid, but they'll try everything to undermine you. I felt neither fear nor doubt, only clarity. Years of humiliation, pain, and suppression had distilled into a single, precise purpose. I would not be broken again. The first hearing began with my father, Dad, looking impossibly smug in a tailored black suit. But beneath the surface, I could see the cracks forming. His hands shook slightly when he adjusted. His cufflinks, the arrogance that had carried him for decades now, seemed fragile, brittle. Mum sat silently beside him, lips pressed tightly, eyes fixed on some distant point. Logan hovered by the back of the room, shifting from one foot to the other. Chewing his lower lip, their lawyer, Carlton Merritt, was present, attempting to maintain an air of professionalism that could not mask the tension vibrating through the room. The DA opened with precision. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, voice unwavering. "We are here today because the defendants have engaged in systematic abuse, financial deception, and intimidation within their family unit. Our evidence includes documented threats, forged signatures, audio recordings of violence and collusion, and corroborating witness statements." Carlton tried to interject, but the judge, a sharp-haired woman named Judge Wilford, who I had seen during the prior family trust hearing, raised her hand. "No interruptions. Proceed with facts." And so the evidence flowed, one damning piece after another. Audio recordings of Dad striking me, my mother laughing, Logan's mocking voice in the background, emails and text messages showing coordination to manipulate inheritance and control finances, signed statements from Melissa, Ryan, and a family friend who had secretly documented years of intimidation. At one point, the prosecutor paused and looked directly at me. Double quotes, "Mr. Blackwood, we need you to testify on the impact these actions had on you both emotionally and financially." I took a deep breath. The courtroom went silent. All eyes were on me, lawyers, family officers, and even passers-by who had come to observe the proceedings. I stood, my voice steady. For years, I lived in fear, fear of being hit, fear of being mocked, fear of losing myself to their control. I watched them strike my body and my spirit, and I was told, explicitly, that I deserved it. I wasn't allowed to speak, wasn't allowed to question, wasn't allowed to exist on my own terms. Every threat, every slap, every laugh was meant to reinforce their dominance. But that stops now. I'm not just testifying for myself. I'm testifying for every person they silenced, every truth they tried to bury, every life they tried to manipulate. The room was still. Even Carlton looked momentarily unsettled. Dad's face had turned pale. Mum's fingers trembled slightly. On the bench, Logan's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing uncontrollably. The testimony moved forward. I presented the recordings in real time, letting the court hear the exact moments of violence and derision. There was no embellishment, no dramatization, just truth, raw and undeniable. Melissa, in attendance, gave her own testimony. "I can't ignore what I saw. I helped him collect evidence, and I stood by because I knew what they would do to him if I spoke earlier. But today, the truth has to come out. I witnessed my brother being abused. I witnessed my parents laugh at it. I will not remain silent." Ryan, my younger brother, corroborated her account. Even the neighbors who had witnessed certain events were called, reinforcing a pattern of consistent behavior spanning years. By late afternoon, the judge called for a recess. The room emptied slowly, but Dad and Logan lingered near the exit. I passed by them quietly, my presence like a silent verdict. "You think you've won?" Dad hissed under his breath, venom barely contained. I didn't respond. Silence was more powerful than any words I could have uttered. He could scream, threaten, or plot revenge. Nothing would reach me anymore. Back in my apartment, I allowed myself the first moment of relief, but it was tempered by awareness. The hearings were far from over. This was a marathon, not a sprint. The federal investigation would continue. Civil suits might follow, and the personal confrontations, the fallout with friends, colleagues, and extended family would stretch over months, possibly years. Still, for the first time, I felt the faint glimmer of freedom. Not just from abuse, but from the shadow of fear and control that had defined my existence for decades. I made a quiet promise to myself. Every step from now on would be deliberate. Every action would be aligned with truth and integrity. No more manipulation, no more fear, no more silence, and somewhere deep inside, I allowed a small, rare thought to surface. Maybe, just maybe, this could end differently. The morning arrived with a crispness in the air that carried both tension and anticipation. I stood outside the courthouse again, hands shoved into my coat pockets, the wind cutting lightly against my face. Months had passed since the initial hearings, but the weight of unresolved trauma still clung to me. This was the day the federal investigators would present their findings, and the press had already begun to gather outside. Cameras, microphones, and flashing lights created a surreal barrier between the world and my life. Detective Harris arrived first, his expression sharp, unreadable. "Julian, today's the culmination. Everything we've collected, analyzed, and documented will be submitted. This isn't just about financial fraud anymore. It's about holding them accountable for years of abuse, manipulation, and threats." I nodded. The word accountable reverberated. In my mind, it wasn't just legal, it wasn't just financial, it was personal. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Dad, Mum, and Logan entered together, a unified front of arrogance and entitlement, but the cracks were already visible. Dad's eyes darted nervously as he scanned the room. Mum's posture was rigid, almost as if she were bracing herself for a physical blow. Logan avoided my gaze entirely. Head down, fingers tapping against the bench. Carlton Merritt, their lawyer, tried to project calm, but his voice occasionally wavered when presenting motions or objections. Even he knew that this case was far beyond normal family litigation. This was about dismantling a carefully constructed web of lies, violence, and deception. The federal prosecutor began with precision, laying out a timeline that spanned over 2 decades. "Your Honor, the evidence shows a sustained pattern of abuse, intimidation, and financial manipulation by the defendants. We have audio recordings, witness statements, forensic financial analysis, and documented instances of physical violence." I watched as Carlton shifted uneasily, flipping through papers and whispering instructions to his clients. Dad's jaw tightened. He clenched the arms of the chair so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Mum's hands were folded in her lap, trembling slightly. Logan's face was pale, his usual bravado stripped away. Then it was my turn to testify. I rose slowly, deliberately, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline and clarity. "Your Honor," I began. "For years, I lived under fear and manipulation. I was told that asking questions or asserting myself was wrong. I was physically attacked. I was laughed at. I was isolated, but I am here today to ensure that truth prevails, not just for me, but for anyone who has suffered in silence." The courtroom remained still. Even Carlton could not interrupt the weight of my words. I presented the recordings again, this time with detailed annotations and expert testimony explaining the context and legality. The audio of Dad striking me, the laughter of Mum and Logan, the threats whispered in shadows, all played with clarity and precision. The judge, Judge Wilford, leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Mr. Blackwood, do you understand the seriousness of these allegations and the evidence presented?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I understand the consequences. I understand the scrutiny, but I also understand that justice cannot be selective. It cannot favor power or wealth over truth. I am here to ensure that accountability is upheld, no matter who is involved." Melissa and Ryan were called to testify next. Their accounts were corroborating, detailed, and emotionally resonant. Melissa spoke of the fear she had felt, the recordings she had secretly captured, and the courage it had taken to step forward. Ryan added his perspective, emphasizing the repeated patterns of abuse and the psychological toll it had taken on all of us. After hours of testimony, The judge called a brief recess. The room emptied, leaving Dad, Mom, and Logan seated silently, each absorbed in their own fear and realization that the walls they had built around themselves were crumbling. Outside, reporters whispered, cameras clicked, and the story was already starting to leak to the public. The facade of wealth and control was beginning to crack. Detective Harris approached me quietly. "You've done well. This is more than legal victory. It's a statement to your family and anyone else who tries to wield power through fear. Stay focused. The next phase is critical cross-examination, closing arguments, and the final judgment." I nodded. I knew the work wasn't over, but, for the first time in my life, I felt a tangible sense of momentum. The tide had shifted. Later that evening, I returned to my apartment, exhausted but resolute. I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing notes, transcripts, and recordings once more. The events of the past weeks, the confrontations, the testimony, the painstaking collection of evidence, weighed heavily on me. But beneath the exhaustion was a quiet satisfaction. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer silent. I was finally taking control of my own narrative. My phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. "You're stronger than you think. Whatever happens next, we face it together." I smiled faintly. Together, to the first time in years. The word felt safe, real, and grounded in truth. The next day would bring the culmination of months of investigation, testimony, and preparation. The day when the court would decide not just the financial implications, but the moral consequences of years of abuse. I knew the fight was far from over. I knew Dad, Mum, and Logan would try everything: manipulation, charm, denial to salvage their reputation. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would not be silenced, I would not be intimidated, I would not let them erase my truth. And as I prepared for the next day, a quiet resolve settled within me. Whatever the outcome, I would emerge whole, unbroken, and finally free. The courthouse was alive with a different energy that morning. It wasn't just tension anymore, it was expectation. News crews lined the street outside. Microphones pointed at anyone who dared step onto the steps. The air smelled faintly of rain from the night before. Mixed with the sharp tang of urgency, inside, I walked through the marble halls, my briefcase in hand, every step deliberate, measured, and steady. I could feel my heart hammering, but not from fear. From focus. Detective Harris met me at the entrance to courtroom B. "Julian, today, everything comes together. Closing arguments, judge's final remarks, and the verdict." I nodded, giving him a curt, determined look. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. Inside, Dad, Mom, and Logan were already seated. Dad's face had paled since the last session. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite place. Maybe panic. Mum had her hands folded tightly in her lap, her pearls clinking faintly as she shifted. Logan avoided all eye contact, staring at the polished floor as if it could swallow him whole. Carlton Merritt, their lawyer, looked frazzled, barely able to maintain the facade of control. This wasn't going to be easy for them. Not anymore. Judge Wilford entered with the same sharp authority she had shown in previous hearings. The room fell silent, every whisper, every footstep absorbed by the tense air. This session will focus on closing arguments and the final verdict regarding the allegations of abuse, intimidation, and financial misconduct within the Blackwood family, she said, her voice resonating. The prosecutor began first, outlining every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every detail of the investigation. They emphasized not just the financial mismanagement, but the pattern of abuse, physical, emotional, and psychological. The audio recordings played again, each strike, each laugh, each threat echoing through the room. Dad flinched visibly, Mum shifted uncomfortably. Logan's knuckles were white as he gripped the bench. When it was Carlton's turn, he tried to minimize the evidence. He argued that my allegations were exaggerated, that the recordings were taken out of context, that my testimony was colored by resentment, but his words fell flat. The weight of proof, the clarity of truth, and the corroborating statements from Melissa Ryan and federal investigators drowned out his attempts at manipulation. Then it was my turn to speak. One final time, I rose slowly, allowing the courtroom to absorb my presence. Your Honor, members of the court, I began, my voice steady. It is not just about punishment, it is about accountability. It is about breaking a cycle of abuse that has been hidden behind wealth, status, and fear. It is about truth, plain, undeniable, and unshakable. For years, I was told to stay silent. I was told that questioning, resisting, or speaking up was a betrayal. I was punched, laughed at, and mocked by those who were supposed to protect me. I was told that loyalty meant obedience, that love meant compliance, that family meant fear. But today, I stand here not seeking revenge, but justice. I stand here for myself, for my siblings, for anyone who has been silenced, and I will not be intimidated, I will not be broken, will not let them dictate the narrative any longer. Judge Wilford listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine. Even Carlton's composure cracked slightly, a telltale sign of the pressure mounting on their side. The clerk handed me the last set of exhibits, and I placed them carefully on the table. Documents showing the extent of financial fraud, the hidden trusts, the offshore accounts, and the manipulations designed to suppress me. Melissa and Ryan sat quietly, giving me subtle nods of support. I didn't need words, their presence alone was enough. Finally, after what felt like hours, the judge stood, her expression unreadable. The court has reviewed all evidence, heard all testimony, and considered the arguments of both parties. It is the judgment of this court that the allegations of abuse, intimidation, and financial misconduct are substantiated. The Blackwood Family Trust, as previously structured, is hereby declared null and void. Julian Blackwood shall have full control over the Vermont Trust, including all assets and instructions, as outlined by his grandfather. Further, Mr. Alan Blackwood is to be investigated and prosecuted for financial fraud and abuse, with all findings to be turned over to the appropriate federal authorities. M.H. Helen Blackwood and Mr. Logan Blackwood are hereby ordered to provide full disclosure of all related financial records within 7 business days. The court also recommends counseling and restitution for any affected parties, including the immediate family members who were subjected to abuse. This session is adjourned. A heavy silence filled the room. Then, one by one, whispers and murmurs began to ripple through the courtroom. Dad's face was ashen. Mum had her hands over her mouth, silent and trembling. Logan's eyes darted around, panic and disbelief etched into every line of his face. I stood, letting the words sink in, letting the weight of victory settle into reality. It wasn't gloating, it wasn't triumph for the sake of revenge, it was clarity, it was justice, it was justice, it was the truth finally being acknowledged. Outside, cameras flashed, microphones were shoved forward, and reporters called out questions. I remained calm, collected. Melissa and Ryan flanked me as we walked down the steps together. No words were needed. The look on their faces said everything. The rain had returned, soft and steady, washing the courthouse steps and the street. It felt symbolic cleansing, renewal, and the start of something unbroken. I finally allowed myself to exhale, to feel the weight lift, if only slightly. This was not the end, it was the beginning of freedom, healing, and building something real out of the ruins of deceit. And as we disappeared into the drizzle, I knew that the life I had always wanted, one of honesty, strength, and purpose, was finally within reach.